Years passed, and the farm that had once been a quiet patch of land tucked away in a small town became known far and wide as a symbol of hope, resilience, and innovation. The boy who had grown up fixing tractors under the watchful eye of his father was now a man leading a movement to show the world that progress doesn't have to come at the cost of tradition. It could honor the past while embracing the future. The engineer, as people now called him, spent his days balancing two worlds, the technical side of things and the human side. While he continued to introduce cutting-edge technologies to the farm, things like automated harvesters, drone surveillance, and AI-driven soil analysis, he never lost sight of the importance of community. He made it a point to involve everyone around him in the process. Whether it was teaching an elderly neighbor how to use the mobile app or helping a young farmer troubleshoot a broken machine, he understood that innovation meant nothing if it didn't benefit the people it was meant for. One of the most remarkable changes during this time was the way the entire region transformed. What had once been struggling farms and neglected villages now buzzed with energy. Roads were repaired, schools were built, and businesses flourished. People who had left the area in search of better opportunities began returning, drawn by the promise of growth and stability. Families reunited, children laughed in newly constructed playgrounds, and elders gathered in community centers to share stories of how far they'd come. At the heart of it all was the partnership between Elijah, Langley, and the engineer. Their collaboration wasn't just about business or technology, it was about trust. Trust that each of them would do what was best for the community. Trust that their differences weren't barriers but strengths. And trust that together, they could create something greater than any one of them could alone. Elijah, though older and slower, remained a cornerstone of the operation. His wisdom guided decisions, his patience calmed tensions, and his humor brought smiles to even the toughest situations. One morning, as he sat on the porch watching the sunrise, he reflected on how much life had changed. "Back when I was your age," he said to the engineer, "I thought success meant keeping the land safe no matter what. But now I see it differently. Success is seeing others thrive because of the work we've done." The engineer nodded, understanding the depth of his father's words. For Elijah, the farm had always been more than property. It was a legacy. And now, thanks to their efforts, that legacy wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Langley, too, found himself reflecting often on the journey they'd shared. In the evenings, after long days of meetings and travel, he would sit by the fireplace in his home, flipping through old photos and notes from the early days of the partnership. There was one picture in particular that always caught his eye. A grainy snapshot of him standing beside Elijah and the young engineer in front of the farmhouse. Back then, none of them could have imagined where their paths would lead. Yet here they were, years later, having accomplished more than any of them had dreamed possible. What struck Langley most was how much he had learned, not just about farming or rural development, but about humanity itself. He had entered the partnership, thinking he was there to help others, but in reality, he had been the one helped. Elijah and the engineer had taught him the value of humility, empathy, and perseverance. They had shown him that true leadership wasn't about control, but about service. And they had reminded him that success isn't measured by wealth or power, but by the lives you touch along the way. As the years went on, the trio faced new challenges, but they tackled them together. Climate change brought unpredictable weather patterns, forcing them to adapt their farming practices yet again. Economic shifts threatened to disrupt supply chains, requiring creative solutions to keep things running smoothly. But every obstacle only strengthened their resolve. They leaned on each other, drawing strength from their shared history and unwavering commitment to the cause. One day, during a particularly difficult season, the engineer stood in the middle of the fields, staring at crops damaged by an unexpected frost. Frustration bubbled inside him, but before he could spiral into despair, Elijah walked up beside him. Without saying a word, the older man placed a hand on his shoulder and gestured toward the horizon. "Look beyond today," he said softly. "Every storm passes and every seed grows. We'll figure it out. Together." Those words stayed with the engineer, grounding him whenever doubt crept in. They reminded him that setbacks were temporary and that resilience was their greatest asset. With renewed determination, he rallied the community, implementing strategies to recover from the frost and prevent similar losses in the future. By spring, the fields were green again, fuller and stronger than before. Meanwhile, Langley continued to champion causes close to his heart. His company became a model for corporate responsibility, earning awards and recognition for its efforts to uplift underserved communities. But for Langley, the accolades weren't what mattered most. What truly fulfilled him was seeing the tangible impact of his work: schools filled with eager students, hospitals equipped with modern facilities, and families living with dignity and purpose. On a crisp autumn morning, the three men gathered once more on the porch of the farmhouse. The air smelled of fresh earth and ripe crops, and the sky stretched endlessly above them. They talked about everything and nothing: the weather, the latest crop yields, memories from the past. At one point, Langley turned to the engineer and said, "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just a kid who happened to fix a machine. I had no idea you'd end up changing my life." The engineer chuckled, shaking his head. "And I had no idea you'd change mine," he replied. "But here we are." Elijah, sitting quietly in his chair, smiled knowingly. "That's how life works sometimes," he said. "You think you're heading in one direction, but then someone comes along and shows you another path. And if you're lucky, you walk it together." Their laughter echoed across the fields, mingling with the sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling in the breeze. In that moment, none of them needed to say more. They understood that their story wasn't just about a farm, a CEO, or a young man with big dreams. It was about connection, about finding common ground despite differences, about believing in the power of teamwork and trust. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the engineer looked out over the land. He thought about all the challenges they'd overcome, all the lives they'd touched, and all the possibilities still ahead. This place wasn't just a farm anymore. It was a testament to what could happen when people refused to give up, when they chose to build bridges instead of walls. And so, the story continued, not as a tale of endings, but as a celebration of beginnings. The seeds planted decades ago by Elijah's ancestors had grown into something extraordinary, nurtured by the hands of a determined farmer, a visionary CEO, and a young engineer who dared to dream. Together, they proved that no matter how tough the soil or how fierce the storms, growth was always possible. All it took was faith, hard work, and a little help from those willing to stand beside you. In the end, their legacy wasn't written in ink or carved in stone. It lived in the hearts of the people they'd inspired, in the fields they'd cultivated, and in the futures they'd shaped. And as long as those stories were told, their journey would continue. A reminder that even the smallest actions can spark the biggest changes. The years rolled on, and the bond between the farmer, the CEO, and the boy-turned-engineer only grew stronger. Each of them carried their own lessons from the journey they'd shared, a journey that had transformed not just their lives, but the lives of countless others around them. The farm, once a symbol of struggle and survival, had become a beacon of hope and innovation. It was no longer just a place to grow crops. It was a hub of learning, collaboration, and inspiration. For the young engineer, every day brought new challenges and opportunities. He had returned home after graduation with big dreams, but he quickly realized that turning those dreams into reality required patience, persistence, and teamwork. Some days were tough, like when a new irrigation system malfunctioned or when skeptical neighbors resisted adopting unfamiliar methods, but he never let setbacks discourage him. Instead, he leaned on the lessons his father had taught him. When something breaks, don't throw it away, fix it. And if you can't fix it right away, keep trying until you do. One of his proudest achievements came when he designed a low-cost water purification system for the community. Many families in the area relied on wells for drinking water, but contamination had always been a problem. After months of testing and tweaking, the engineer finally developed a solution that was both affordable and effective. When he unveiled it during a community gathering, The room erupted in applause. Mothers hugged him, fathers shook his hand, and children ran up to thank him for making their lives safer. For the first time, clean water was accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy or well-connected. Word of this breakthrough spread quickly, reaching far beyond the small town. Environmental organizations praised the invention, calling it a model for sustainable development in rural areas. Soon, requests poured in from neighboring regions, asking if the system could be replicated elsewhere. The engineer agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to expand his impact. But instead of tackling the project alone, he enlisted the help of local workers, training them to build and maintain the systems themselves. In doing so, he created jobs and empowered people to take ownership of their futures. Meanwhile, Elijah continued to play a vital role in the community. Though age had slowed him down physically, his wisdom remained sharp, and his presence commanded respect. He became a mentor to younger farmers, sharing stories of resilience and offering practical advice on everything from crop rotation to financial planning. On weekends, he hosted gatherings at the farm, inviting neighbors to share meals, swap ideas, and celebrate their progress. These events weren't just social, they were a reminder of the strength found in unity. Elijah's relationship with Langley also deepened over time. What had started as a reluctant partnership evolved into a genuine friendship. They often met to discuss ongoing projects, brainstorm new initiatives, and reflect on how much had changed since their initial meeting. Langley marveled at Elijah's ability to lead without seeking recognition, while Elijah admired Langley's willingness to listen and adapt. Together, they proved that differences in background and perspective didn't have to divide people. They could enrich relationships and drive meaningful change. Langley's transformation extended beyond his personal life. It reshaped his entire company. Inspired by the success of the farm partnership, he implemented similar programs across the country, focusing on underserved communities. His team worked closely with local leaders to identify needs and develop tailored solutions, whether it was building schools, improving infrastructure, or supporting small businesses. Employees who had once viewed Langley as distant or unapproachable now saw him as approachable and compassionate. Morale soared, productivity increased, and the company's reputation improved dramatically. But perhaps the most surprising shift occurred within Langley himself. For decades, he had defined success by numbers, profits, market shares, stock, prices. Now, he measured it differently. Success, he realized, was about creating opportunities for others to succeed. It was about leaving a legacy that went beyond wealth and power, and it was about recognizing that true leadership wasn't about commanding obedience, it was about earning trust. Back on the farm, life continued to flourish. Crops grew taller, fields expanded, and innovations multiplied. The engineer's mobile app gained national attention, attracting partnerships with tech companies eager to support its growth. Farmers who had once relied solely on manual labor now used drones to monitor their land and software to optimize planting schedules. Productivity skyrocketed, and incomes rose accordingly. Families who had struggled to make ends meet suddenly found themselves planning vacations, buying homes, and investing in their children's education. Yet, despite all the progress, the engineer never lost sight of what mattered most: community. He made it a point to visit schools regularly, speaking to students about the importance of education and perseverance. "You don't have to leave your hometown to chase your dreams," he'd tell them. "Sometimes the greatest opportunities are right here, waiting for you to discover them." His words resonated deeply, especially among kids who had grown up thinking success was reserved for those who moved away. One particular student stood out, a shy girl with a knack for math and science. She reminded the engineer of himself at her age, curious, hardworking, and full of untapped potential. He took her under his wing, encouraging her to pursue her interests and introducing her to mentors who could guide her along the way. Years later, when she graduated from college with honors and returned home to contribute to the community, he felt a swell of pride. Watching her succeed reinforced his belief that investing in people was the key to lasting change. As the seasons changed, so did the dynamics within the trio. Elijah grew older, eventually handing over the reins of the farm to his son. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with pride and nostalgia. "You've done more with this land than I ever dreamed possible," Elijah said during a quiet evening, on the porch. "Now it's your turn to carry the torch." The engineer nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. But he also felt ready. He knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but he trusted in the values his father had instilled in him, and in the support of those around him. Langley, too, began preparing for the next chapter of his life. Though he remained actively involved in his company, he stepped back from day-to-day operations, delegating responsibilities to younger executives he had mentored over the years. He spent more time traveling, visiting the communities his initiatives had touched and listening to the stories of people whose lives had been transformed. Each encounter reinforced his belief in the power of connection and collaboration. On one such trip, he found himself back in the small town where it all began. Walking through the bustling streets, he marveled at how much had changed. New businesses lined the roads, children played in freshly paved parks, and laughter echoed from every corner. When he arrived at the farm, he was greeted by the engineer who proudly showed him the latest innovations. As they stood side by side surveying the vibrant fields, Langley couldn't help but smile. "You know," he said, "when I first met your father, I thought this place was just a piece of land. But now I see it for what it really is. A foundation. A starting point for something much bigger." The engineer nodded, understanding exactly what Langley meant. The farm wasn't just soil and crops. It was a symbol of resilience, innovation, and unity. It represented the power of people coming together to overcome obstacles and create something extraordinary. As the sun set over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the landscape, the three men gathered on the porch, one generation passing, the torch to the next, united by a shared vision of a brighter future. Their story wasn't perfect. It had moments of tension, doubt, and uncertainty, but it was real. And in its imperfection lay its beauty. Because in the end, it wasn't about perfection. It was about connection, about growth, about believing in the possibility of change, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. After graduation, the boy returned home with a degree in engineering and a head full of ideas. He could have gone anywhere, big cities, tech hubs, places where opportunities seemed endless. But his heart stayed rooted in the small town where he grew up. The land wasn't just dirt to him. It was family, history, identity. It was the place that taught him how to solve problems, work hard, and dream bigger than anyone thought possible. And now, armed with knowledge and experience, he was ready to give back. His first step was to modernize the farm even further. Using what he'd learned at university, he introduced advanced tools and techniques that would make farming easier, faster, and more sustainable. One of his biggest projects involved setting up solar panels to power irrigation systems. This not only cut down on electricity costs but also made the farm eco-friendly, a move that earned praise from environmental groups and inspired neighboring farmers to follow suit. He didn't stop there. Remembering the struggles his father had faced over the years, he designed a mobile app specifically for local farmers. The app allowed them to track weather patterns, monitor crop growth, and connect with buyers directly, cutting out middlemen, who often took a large chunk of their profits. At first, some older farmers were hesitant to embrace technology. They joked that they weren't tech-savvy enough, but the boy patiently showed them how simple and helpful it could be. Within months, the app became an essential tool for dozens of families in the area. The changes didn't go unnoticed. News of the innovative young man transforming traditional farming practices spread beyond the town. Journalists came to interview him, magazines featured his story, and soon invitations to speak at conferences started pouring in. For someone who'd once felt out of place among city slickers, standing on stage in front of hundreds of people was surreal. But he spoke with the same quiet confidence he'd shown when fixing that factory machine all those years ago. His message was simple yet powerful. Progress doesn't mean abandoning your roots, it means finding ways to honor them while moving forward. Back in the community, The impact of his efforts was undeniable. Farms that had been struggling for years began turning profits again. Families who had worried about sending their kids to college suddenly found themselves able to afford tuition fees. Younger generations, inspired by the boy's success, started dreaming bigger. Some decided to pursue careers in agriculture, blending science and innovation with age-old traditions. Others ventured into different fields, knowing they could always come home to a supportive community. But perhaps the most profound change happened within Elijah himself. Watching his son transform the farm, and by extension the entire community, filled him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in decades. He realized that passing down the land wasn't just about preserving property, it was about creating a foundation for future generations to build upon. Every sunset he watched from the porch, every meal shared around the dinner table, reminded him of why he'd fought so hard to keep the land in the first place. For Langley, this period marked a turning point in both his personal and professional life. Seeing the tangible results of his partnership with Elijah reinforced his belief in the power of collaboration. He began expanding similar initiatives across other rural areas, investing in communities that had long been overlooked. His company launched programs aimed at training young people in STEM fields, offering scholarships and providing resources to underprivileged schools. It wasn't charity. It was investment. By empowering others, he knew he was building a stronger, more resilient society. One day, Langley received an unexpected visit from Elijah. They met at the same cafe where they'd first sat down together years earlier. This time, however, the atmosphere was lighter, warmer. Over cups of coffee, Elijah expressed his gratitude, not just for the financial support, but for the respect and understanding Langley had shown. "You didn't just help us grow crops," Elijah said. "You helped us grow as people." Langley smiled, though his eyes betrayed a hint of emotion. "I should be thanking you," he replied. "You reminded me of something I'd forgotten. That business isn't just about numbers, it's about people, about trust, about legacy." Their conversation turned reflective as they discussed the journey they'd been on together. Both men acknowledged that they'd come a long way since their initial meeting. Back then, they'd viewed each other through lenses clouded by assumptions and misunderstandings. Now they saw each other clearly as partners, allies, friends. As the years passed, the boy continued to push boundaries, constantly seeking new ways to improve life for those around him. He partnered with universities to conduct research on sustainable farming methods, worked with policymakers to advocate for rural development, and even started mentoring young students interested in engineering. To him, success wasn't measured by titles or wealth, but by the number of lives he touched along the way. Elijah, meanwhile, became a pillar of wisdom in the community. People sought his advice not just on farming, but on life itself. He often told stories about the struggles his ancestors had faced, reminding everyone that resilience was their greatest strength. When asked about his secret to happiness, he'd smile and say, "It's simple. You plant seeds not just in the ground but in people's hearts. Then you nurture them, watch them grow, and trust that they'll carry the harvest forward." Langley, too, embraced a new role, that of a bridge builder. He used his platform to amplify voices that had long been silenced, advocating for policies that promoted equity and inclusion. His transformation wasn't lost on those who had known him for years. Employees whispered about how much he'd changed, how he treated everyone with dignity and respect. Critics softened their tone, acknowledging that his actions spoke louder than words. Despite their differences in background and upbringing, the three men remained connected by a shared vision, a world where everyone had the opportunity to thrive. Their partnership served as proof that unlikely alliances could lead to extraordinary outcomes. What started as a clash of wills evolved into a friendship built on mutual respect and admiration. On a crisp autumn morning, the boy stood in the middle of the farm, looking out at the rows of healthy crops stretching toward the horizon. Beside him stood Elijah, leaning on his cane, and Langley, dressed casually for once instead of in his usual suit. Together they marveled at how far they'd come, from a broken machine on a factory floor to a thriving community united by purpose. "We did good," Elijah said softly, breaking the silence. The boy nodded, smiling. Yeah, we did. Langley chuckled, shaking his head. No, he corrected gently. You did good. We just got lucky enough to be part of it. In that moment, none of them needed to say more. They understood that their journey wasn't just about individual achievements, it was about collective growth, about learning from the past, embracing the present, and working together to create a better future. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the fields, they knew the story wasn't ending. It was simply continuing chapter by chapter, generation by generation. The partnership between the farmer and the CEO started small, almost cautiously. Neither man fully trusted the other at first, and both were stepping into uncharted territory. For Elijah, it was hard to let go of years of skepticism about people. Like Langley, people who always seemed to want something from him without truly understanding what he stood for. And for Langley, this was a completely new approach. He wasn't used to asking questions or seeking permission. He was accustomed to making decisions and expecting others to fall in line. But this time, things had to be different. Langley began by sending a team of agricultural experts to assess the farm. These weren't just any consultants. They were specialists in sustainable farming practices, soil health, and modern irrigation techniques. At first, Elijah watched them warily, unsure if they'd respect his way of doing things. He'd spent decades working the land his way, relying on methods passed down through generations. Would these outsiders come in with their fancy gadgets and formulas and dismiss everything he knew? But much to Elijah's surprise, the team didn't try to impose anything on him. Instead, they listened. They asked questions about how he managed crops, dealt with weather challenges, and handled equipment repairs. They even complimented some of his traditional methods, saying that certain age-old techniques were still highly effective. Slowly, but surely Elijah began to see them not as threats but as allies. Together, they worked out a plan to blend innovation with tradition, creating a system that honored the past while embracing the future. One of the biggest changes came when Langley invested in upgrading the farm's machinery. Gone were the days of patching up old tractors with duct tape and spare parts scavenged from junkyards. Now, Elijah had access to state-of-the-art equipment designed to save time, reduce labor, and increase efficiency. The boy, who had already proven himself capable of fixing anything with wheels, was thrilled to get his hands on these new machines. He spent hours tinkering with them, learning every detail and teaching his father along the way. For the boy, this transformation felt like a dream come true. Growing up, he'd often wondered if there was more to life than endless days of manual labor under the scorching sun. He loved the farm, yes, but he also craved opportunities to grow and explore. With the upgrades and support from Langley's company, those opportunities were finally within reach. He threw himself into the work, helping implement new systems and training neighbors who wanted to learn. Watching him thrive gave Elijah a deep sense of pride. His son wasn't just carrying on the family legacy, he was building something entirely new. As the farm flourished, so did the community around it. Neighboring farmers, inspired by what they saw happening on Elijah's land, began adopting similar practices. Some reached out directly to Langley's company for advice, while others leaned on Elijah for guidance. What started as a single partnership blossomed into a network of collaboration and mutual support. People who had once been isolated by competition now found strength in working together. The ripple effect was undeniable: higher yields, healthier soil, and renewed hope for families who had struggled for years. Meanwhile, back at the factory, Langley couldn't help but notice the change in himself. For years, he'd prided himself on being a shrewd businessman, a man who made tough decisions and never looked back. But meeting Elijah and seeing the impact of their partnership forced him to confront parts of himself he'd long ignored. He realized that success wasn't just about numbers on a balance sheet. It was about the lives you touched along the way. And he couldn't deny that this experience had touched him deeply. Langley started paying closer attention to the people around him, not just employees and interns, but also the communities affected by his business. He visited schools, spoke at local events, and listened to stories from people whose voices had rarely been heard. Each conversation left an impression, shaping the way he thought about leadership and responsibility. He began implementing policies aimed at increasing diversity and inclusion within his company, ensuring that opportunities were available to everyone, regardless of background. It wasn't always easy. Some of his longtime colleagues resisted the changes, but Langley stood firm, knowing it was the right thing to do. Back on the farm, the boy continued to shine. By combining what he'd learned during his internship with the practical skills he'd grown up with, he developed innovative solutions to problems that had plagued farmers for years. One of his ideas involved using sensors to monitor soil moisture levels, allowing farmers to conserve water and prevent over-irrigation. Another focused on crop rotation strategies that maximized yield while maintaining soil fertility. When he presented these concepts to Langley's engineers, they were impressed, not just by the technical details but by the passion behind them. Word of the boy's talent spread quickly, earning him recognition far beyond the small town where he grew up. Universities and tech companies began reaching out, offering scholarships and internships. At first, the boy hesitated. Leaving home meant stepping away from the land that had shaped him, the place where his roots ran deepest. But Elijah encouraged him to take the leap, reminding him that growth sometimes requires letting go. "You're not leaving us behind," Elijah said. "You're taking us with you, in your heart and in your mind." With his father's blessing, the boy accepted a full scholarship to study engineering at a prestigious university. On the day he left, the entire community gathered to celebrate. Neighbors brought food, friends shared stories, and Elijah gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "This boy has shown us all what's possible when you refuse to give up," Elijah said. "He's proof that no matter where you start, you can build a brighter future, not just for yourself but for everyone around you." As the bus pulled away, carrying the boy toward his next adventure, Elijah stood watching until it disappeared from sight. He felt a mix of emotions, pride, sadness, and hope, all swirling together. Pride because his son had accomplished so much, sadness because he'd miss him dearly, and hope because he knew the boy would carry their family's values wherever he went. At the university, the boy thrived. He excelled in his classes, earned the respect of professors and peers alike, and continued to innovate. But no matter how far he traveled or how much he achieved, he never forgot where he came from. During breaks, he returned home to help his father and share what he'd learned. Those visits became a source of inspiration for everyone in the community, proof that education and ambition didn't have to mean abandoning your roots. Years later, when the boy graduated at the top of his class, Langley attended the ceremony. Sitting in the audience, he watched with pride as the young man walked across the stage to receive his diploma. This wasn't just another success story. It was a testament to the power of connection, resilience, and belief in oneself. As the boy shook hands with the university president, he scanned the crowd until his eyes landed on Langley. Their gazes met, and for a brief moment, neither man needed to say a word. They both knew how far they'd come, and how much further they could go together. The journey wasn't over. In fact, it was only beginning. But one thing was certain. The bond forged between a farmer, a CEO, and a boy with big dreams had changed all of their lives forever. And in doing so, it had reminded them, and everyone who heard their story, that true progress isn't measured by profits or accolades. It's measured by the bridges we build, the legacies we honor, and the futures we create together. The boy's quick thinking and calm demeanor left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed the scene, especially the CEO. After the machine sprang back to life, there was a brief moment of silence before the factory floor erupted into murmurs of relief and admiration. The engineers exchanged glances, some nodding in approval while others muttered under their breath about how they hadn't even considered checking for something as simple as a misaligned gear. It wasn't just the fact that the boy had fixed the machine. It was the way he carried himself. He didn't rush or panic. Instead, he moved with quiet confidence, trusting his instincts and the lessons he'd learned growing up. Richard Langley, the CEO, stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching the boy closely. At first glance, Langley seemed like any other. No-nonsense businessman, sharp suit, polished shoes, and an air of authority that commanded respect. But beneath the surface, he was intrigued. Most interns would have frozen under pressure when addressed so directly by someone of his stature. Yet this boy had stepped forward without hesitation, diagnosing the problem faster than anyone else could. Curious, Langley approached him after the commotion died down. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, his tone gruff, but not unkind. Boy hesitated for a second, unsure how much to share. Then, remembering his father's advice to always be honest, he replied, "I grew up fixing tractors and plows on my dad's farm. Machines are machines. You just have to listen to them." Langley raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the answer. There was something refreshing about the boy's straightforwardness, something genuine that stood out in a world often filled with pretense. Still, Langley didn't say much more. He gave a curt nod, thanked him, and walked away, leaving the boy standing there wondering if he'd said the wrong thing. But the encounter stuck with Langley long after the day ended. That evening, sitting alone in his office overlooking the sprawling factory grounds, he found himself replaying the conversation in his mind. Something about the boy's response gnawed at him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him want to dig deeper. Who was this kid? Where did he come from? And why did he seem so different from the other interns? Langley wasn't one to leave questions unanswered. Using his connections within the company, he discreetly looked into the boy's background. It didn't take long for him to discover the name of the boy's father, a farmer whose land had been a thorn in Langley's side for years. The pieces started falling into place, and suddenly, everything clicked. This wasn't just any boy. He was the son of Elijah Johnson, the very same man who had repeatedly refused Langley's offers to buy his family's land. For years, Langley had seen Elijah as nothing more than a stubborn obstacle standing in the way of progress. His company needed that land to expand its operations, and he'd offered what he believed was a fair price. More than fair, in fact. But Elijah had declined every offer, politely yet firmly, insisting that the land wasn't for sale. To Langley, it had felt like defiance, even arrogance. How could someone turn down such an opportunity? Didn't Elijah realize how much money and security he was giving up? Now, staring at the file on his desk, Langley began to see things differently. This wasn't just about land anymore. It was about legacy. It was about roots. And maybe, just maybe, it was about pride too. For the first time, Langley allowed himself to consider the possibility that Elijah's refusal wasn't born out of greed or spite, but rather out of love. Love for the land his ancestors had fought so hard to keep. Love for the future he wanted to build for his son. The realization hit Langley like a punch to the gut. All those years, he'd viewed Elijah as an adversary, someone to outsmart or wear down until he caved. But now, seeing the young boy standing confidently on the factory floor, Langley realized he'd been looking at the situation all wrong. This wasn't a battle to win. It was a story to understand. A story of resilience, sacrifice, and determination, passed down through generations. Determined to learn more, Langley decided to reach out to Elijah personally. He picked up the phone and dialed the number listed in the file. When Elijah answered, his voice was cautious, almost guarded. Langley introduced himself, skipping the formalities and getting straight to the point. "Mr. Johnson," he said, "I think we need to talk." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, Elijah responded, "About what?" "Your son," Langley replied simply. "And your land." Elijah agreed to meet, though he sounded skeptical. They arranged to sit down the following week at a small cafe near the edge of town. The meeting was tense at first, both men sizing each other up like two boxers in opposite corners of a ring. Langley knew he had to tread carefully. If he came across as pushy or insincere, Elijah would shut him out completely. So, instead of diving straight into business, Langley asked questions, genuine ones. He wanted to know about Elijah's family, his history, and why the land meant so much to him. As Elijah spoke, Langley listened intently, letting the words sink in. Elijah told him about his ancestors, who had purchased the land during Reconstruction, a time when owning property was practically unheard of for black families. They had faced countless challenges over the decades: discriminatory laws, predatory lenders, and outright hostility from neighbors who resented their success. Despite it all, they held on, passing the land down to each new generation as a symbol of hope and perseverance. Listening to Elijah's story, Langley felt a wave of guilt wash over him. He had spent years trying to acquire the land without ever stopping to ask why Elijah wouldn't sell. Now, hearing the depth of emotion behind the refusal, he understood. This wasn't just dirt and crops. It was a piece of history, a testament to survival against all odds. And the boy working in his factory? He was carrying that legacy with him every single day. By the end of the conversation, the tension between the two men had softened considerably. Langley proposed a new idea, one that didn't involve buying the land. Instead, he suggested partnering with Elijah to modernize the farm, providing access to cutting-edge technology and resources that would help increase productivity and profitability. In return, Elijah could supply produce to Langley's factories, creating jobs and boosting the local economy. It was a win-win solution, one that respected Elijah's wishes while still benefiting both parties. Elijah thought it over carefully before agreeing. He knew it wouldn't be easy, change never was, but he also recognized the potential for growth and opportunity. For his son's sake, he was willing to take the risk. Meanwhile, back at the factory, the boy continued to impress everyone around him. His natural talent for problem-solving combined with his willingness to learn quickly earned him the respect of even the harshest critics. Under Langley's mentorship, he developed innovative ideas for improving manufacturing processes, earning recognition not just from his peers but also from senior engineers. By the end of the summer, he had secured a full scholarship to a top engineering university, thanks in part to Langley's glowing recommendation. The boy returned home that fall with a renewed sense of purpose. He shared his experiences with his father, who listened proudly, knowing that their family's struggles had shaped the strong, capable young man standing before him. Together, they began implementing some of the changes Langley had suggested, transforming the farm into a model of efficiency and sustainability. Neighboring farmers took notice, adopting similar practices and revitalizing the entire community. As for Langley, the experience changed him in ways he never expected. He became a vocal advocate for racial equity and economic empowerment, using his wealth and influence to support underserved communities. His partnership with Elijah taught him that true success isn't measured by profit margins alone, but by the positive impact one can have on others. What started as a simple act of kindness, a chance encounter between a boy and a CEO, blossomed into something far greater. It reminded everyone involved that sometimes the smallest gestures can lead to the biggest transformations. And in the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about understanding, connection, and the power of humanity to bridge divides. In a small, quiet town in Georgia, where the red clay roads stretched endlessly and the air carried the faint smell of fresh earth, there lived a young boy who would one day change the lives of those around him. This boy grew up surrounded by fields of cotton and corn, working alongside his father from sunrise to sunset. His father was a farmer, a man whose hands were rough from years of labor but whose heart was soft with dreams for his son. He had inherited this land from his own father, and his father before that, going back generations. It wasn't just dirt, it was their legacy, their pride, and their struggle all rolled into one. The boy spent most of his childhood outdoors, learning how things worked. From fixing broken tractors to mending fences, he had a knack for solving problems. His father often joked, "If you can fix a tractor engine, you can fix anything." But life on the farm wasn't easy. Money was tight, and every harvest season brought its own set of challenges. Yet despite these hardships, the boy never complained. Instead, he soaked up every lesson his father taught him, knowing deep down that these skills would take him far someday. One summer afternoon, as the boy, helped his father repair an old tractor under the blazing sun. Something unexpected happened. A phone call came through. His school counselor was on the line. The counselor sounded excited, almost breathless, as she told him about a unique opportunity. There was a local manufacturing company looking for young people to join their internship program. They wanted kids who showed promise, kids who could think outside the box and weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. She thought of him instantly. At first, the boy hesitated. He'd never been outside his small community, let alone stepped foot inside a big factory. What did he know about manufacturing? But his father encouraged him, saying, "Son, sometimes you've got to step out of your comfort zone to find what you're truly capable of." With that advice ringing in his ears, the boy decided to give it a shot. He filled out the application form carefully, pouring his heart into each answer. When the letter arrived weeks later confirming his acceptance, he felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Little did he know, this decision would lead to moments that would shape not only his future but also the lives of others. On the morning of his first day at the internship, the boy woke up earlier than usual. He stood in front of the mirror adjusting his clothes, a pair of clean jeans and a neatly pressed shirt borrowed from his older brother. He didn't have fancy suits or polished shoes like some of the other interns might have, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. As he walked toward the bus stop, he couldn't help but notice the stares from neighbors who probably wondered why someone like him was heading off to such a prestigious place. When he arrived at the factory, the difference between his world and theirs hit him hard. The building was massive, with towering steel walls and machines that hummed louder than any tractor he'd ever heard. Inside, the other interns looked nothing like him. Most of them wore expensive sneakers and designer backpacks, chatting casually about private schools and family vacations. He felt out of place, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Still, he reminded himself why he was here: to learn, to grow, and to prove that he belonged just as much as anyone else. As the group began their tour of the facility, the boy listened intently, absorbing every detail. While some of the other interns seemed bored or distracted, he marveled at the intricate machinery lining the factory floor. Each machine moved with precision, performing tasks faster than human hands ever could. For the first time, he realized how much the world relied on these creations, and how much potential there was to improve them. But not everyone shared his enthusiasm. During lunch breaks, he overheard snide comments from some of the workers. "Oh, look, the country kid made it here," one of them whispered loud enough for him to hear. Another chimed in, "Probably only got in because of some diversity quota." The word stung, but instead of letting them bring him down, he used them as fuel. If they thought he didn't belong, then he'd show them otherwise. And he wouldn't do it by arguing or fighting back. He'd let his actions speak for themselves. It wasn't long before fate gave him the chance to shine. One morning, chaos erupted on the factory floor. A key machine responsible for assembling parts had stopped working, causing a bottleneck that threatened to delay production for hours. Engineers scrambled to diagnose the problem, but no one could figure out what was wrong. Just as tempers started flaring, the CEO of the company stormed onto the scene. Richard Langley was known for being tough, demanding perfection from everyone around him. He barked orders left and right, growing more frustrated by the minute. Then, almost instinctively, his eyes landed on the boy standing quietly near the edge of the crowd. Without thinking twice, Langley pointed directly at him and said, "You, kid, go fix that thing." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the boy, unsure if the CEO even realized he was talking to an intern, and one who clearly didn't, come from privilege judging by his appearance. For a moment the boy froze. Could he really step up to the challenge? Then, remembering everything his father had taught him about staying calm under pressure, he nodded and approached the machine. Pushing aside his nerves, he examined it closely, running his fingers along its surface until he found the source of the issue. It was something simple, a misaligned gear hidden deep within the machine's core, but it required sharp observation to spot. With steady hands, the boy adjusted the gear and flipped the power switch. Within seconds, the machine roared back to life, resuming its rhythmic motions as though nothing had gone wrong. The engineers exchanged astonished glances, while Langley watched silently, his expression unreadable. For the first time since arriving at the factory, the boy felt a flicker of pride. Not because he'd proven the doubters wrong, but because he'd shown himself what he was capable of achieving. That single moment became the spark that ignited a chain of events no one could have predicted.